All right, in this lesson we're going to be talking about static mesh collisions. Of course, a collision is when one thing collides with something else, and since this VTM is all about static meshes, we're talking about how to handle collisions that occur with our static meshes that we create. And there's several ways that we can go about doing it, and we're going to be exploring all of those different techniques inside this lesson here. But first, let's go ahead and start out with some very simple things, Logan. First of all, things that can collide or cause a collision, things that can collide with a static mesh. What are we looking at?
Well, your player and also projectiles will collide with the static mesh. And finally, things like ragdolls, vehicles, and other karma objects.
Okay. Yeah, those are pretty important. I would definitely like to see my player be able to walk on a catwalk that I may have created over inside of another 3D application, or not be able to walk through pipes, or if it shot at something that was created from a static mesh, I'd like to see it perhaps explode or cause any sort of detonation effect that it may have. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. Generally, a lot of what you're building is actual architecture, and generally stuff like players and projectiles collide with architecture.
Exactly. Now, we've got a lot of different ways that we can go about setting up collision handling, and let's just go ahead and talk about those real quick, Logan. First of all, probably one of the most simplistic approaches would be to use a blocking volume. That's just a matter of going in, taking a simple brush, and adding it in as a blocking volume, and it more or less it just acts like a simple force field.
Right, it's simplistic because at that point, if you define it right, you're colliding with the blocking volume instead of the static mesh itself.
So there's no static mesh collision calculations that are going on at the moment, which is really cool.
Right, it's pretty much the same as colliding with a brush.
Just like running into a wall or something. Okay, so that brings us over. So that's non-static mesh collision handling, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah, it's basically just like avoiding the collision with the static mesh.
Exactly. So now let's go ahead and talk about true static mesh collision handling. And it breaks down into three categories. And those three categories are really the different type of things that can collide with static meshes. Again, it's players, projectiles, and karma. And players and projectiles, they both share the same type of collision handling that's available, except they can be set independently of one another. And these types of handling are, we've got visible triangles, also known as per poly. And this is where basically collision will be calculated on every single face or every single polygon on our static mesh. So this could become quite tedious on the processor, right?
Right. I mean, if you had a very dense mesh, it would start to weigh on the processor a little. Also, if you had intricate geometry, like if you had cables coming off of your static mesh, it might be easier for your player to get caught on, or it'd be hard to strafe through, or stuff like that.
Exactly, and we definitely wouldn't want players to get hung up on some of our static meshes. That would not be good. But there is something that's really cool about per poly, and that is the fact that we can actually divide the collisions down even further. I guess you could say tighter control, and we can do that through materials, right?
Right. If you have multiple materials on your mesh, you can actually go in and say whether each material is supposed to collide or not.
Yeah, that's so cool. Now that's per poly. Now we also have the ability to use a collision model, and this collision model will actually be stored as part of the static mesh itself, rather in the package or my level if you do it that way. And Logan, if you want real quick, go ahead and open up the static mesh browser. And go ahead and show them. Inside the static mesh browser, you can show collisions. So if he clicks on view up here, you can see there's show collision from the menu. If he turns that on, look at that. Logan, you want to talk about it real quick?
Right. You can see that the bulldog is made up of many, many triangles. However, this collision mesh is very simple. It's basically what you do with a collision mesh is you make as simple a geometry as you possibly can so that the collisions are as fast as possible.
Exactly. So it doesn't have to worry about all of that high detail. Again, this is, as you were saying a minute ago, if we were using per poly and we had something that was very dense, that could become very CPU intensive.
Right. Now that you could get caught up on like finer details that you would rather just be able to slide right past.
Exactly. Now, working with a collision model, there's actually a few different ways that we can go about generating it, and I'll just real quickly touch on these. We can custom create it from a brush. So in other words, we can go into our scene, we can use several brushes, and basically intersect those, and because in the end we need to use a builder brush for this.
Right. Basically all it is you select the mesh that you want to create the collision model for, and right-click on it and say create collision from brush, and what that does is grab the builder brush in relation to wherever the builder brush is compared to the mesh, and throws it in as the collision object.
And you can't go about selecting like subtractive brushes and things. It's
Right.
got to be the builder
Right,
brush.
that's what Buzz was talking about doing the intersect. If you built your collision out of multiple brushes, you'd have to take the builder brush and intersect that, so you can grab everything as one brush from the builder brush.
Okay, so that is one way to go about creating a collision model. We can also custom create a collision model in any sort of 3D application that exports out to ASC file format, the ASCII scene export. And we'll take a look at that a little bit later. And finally, we have KDOP, which is a special type of bounding box that has the ability to be beveled, if you want to look at it that way.
Right, it's just a bounding box that can try to fit as best it can to your mesh, basically beveling at more detailed parts.
Yeah, beveling at edges and at corners, and we'll be looking at it a little bit later. Now, like I said, projectiles use the same things that we just talked about, the same different collision handling, whether per poly or with some sort of collision modeling or model, but you do have the ability to set projectiles to use one way, players to use another, correct, Logan?
Right. This is generally because you want, if you have a dense mesh, you want to use the collision model so that you have as smooth and fast a collision as possible. However, you often leave, or almost always leave, the projectiles to collide per poly. Generally because you can see exactly where the projectile is hitting the mesh, so it looks funny if it's not hitting the points that you can see.
Absolutely. So, as I said, this is a breakdown into 3 different categories, and we've talked about 2 now, players and projectiles. That leaves Karma. Now, Karma falls, it's very closely related, but it falls a little bit into a category of its own. It also runs off of or has collision handling for visible triangles, or again, per poly, and that as well can be further divided by materials, right?
Exactly.
And we have Karma primitives. And let's see, can we go about, well, we could generate a new one for this guy real quick if we wanted to.
Yeah, or I could go and grab the one I was using real quick. And let's say if we were to just if you want to throw a very simple Karma primitive, you could just fit one to it. Let's say fit a sphere.
That sounds good. Now watch this. He's going to go up to View, and you saw from View a few minutes ago that he could come down and click on Show Collision. He could also come down and click on Show Karma Primitives. Okay, and there's a Karma primitive. Now what's a Karma primitive?
Well, that is what Karma object will use if you have if you're using simple Karma collision, meaning you want it to use a collision model, but Karma doesn't use the collision model of players and projectiles. It uses what's called collision primitives.
Right. Okay, so basically what he's getting at right now is when dealing with players and projectiles, we're talking about a character that's, of course, let's say running across our platform there, or let's say a rocket that explodes on our platform there. But if you were to, say, suicide or die on top of the platform there, or drive a vehicle over the platform there, that kind of falls into this Karma category, isn't that correct?
Right. In this case, with this type of
yeah,
primitive,
with that one on there right there, if you were to suicide, I guess you could say. In other words, if you were to kill yourself in there or get killed, you would, if you were actually standing on the walk itself, you would get pushed out of that, wouldn't you?
Right, because it's looking at this as a solid like mass that collides with any Karma objects.
Exactly. And now if you were to, let's say, die above it and you were to fall down, let's say from a level above down, you would actually hit the top of that sphere shape right there and then slide off of it. And perhaps a little bit later on when we actually get into doing this, creating some of these things inside our scene itself, we can go and show that one, because that's always quite funny to see this invisible force field block our character as it's falling. Okay, so as far as Karma primitives are concerned, we've got, again, a few different ways that we can go about generating them. First of all, they're generated off of custom-created collision models automatically.
Right, if you bring in a collision model, as we were looking at with the Bulldog, where it has, when you actually bring in, so if you had imported this collision model, when it goes to create Karma primitives, it'll fit Karma primitives to the collision model as best it can, because there's special rules it has to follow for generating Karma primitives.
Exactly. And then we've got KDOP as well. And finally, we have a third and new one that's called Fit Karma Primitive. And basically what it does is it auto-fits a cylinder or a sphere around the object. Right, Logan?
Right.
Okay, so So let's see. The next thing we can talk about real quick is we're getting close to wrapping all this up and actually starting to do a few things, and that is in the Static Mesh browser, you've got 3 parameters always when dealing with static meshes that allow you to control the collision handling that we just discussed, all of these different techniques, whether with a collision model or per poly, etc. And these are, Logan, if you want to go ahead and actually point them out, we've got use simple karma collision, we've got use simple box collision, and we've got use simple line collision. Logan, you want to take just a second and talk about what these do? It's very simple.
Well, you see, with simple box and simple line, what those will do is specify whether we want to use if we imported a collision model, do we want to actually use that for collision, or do we want to go back to using per poly? That's how if you had brought in a collision model and we're using it to collide with players, but still wanted per poly collision for like projectiles, you could turn off the collision model as far as projectiles are concerned.
So basically, what this does is those 3 different parameters they're seeing, they could in their head just break this down into seeing them as player, projectiles, and karma.
Right.
And true, false, true meaning use the collision model, false meaning use per poly.
Exactly.
Okay, so trying to keep things as simple as possible. So with this, let's go ahead and talk about when you first import a static mesh. By default, the following collision properties that are assigned. Well, let me just put it like this. The player collides with collision model. Okay, correct? Logan's having to think. So when you first bring in a player, okay, it's set to true down there. Isn't that correct?
Well, it is, but let's see.
Now,
yeah.
if there is no collision model found, though, in other words, there wasn't one that was actually created inside the 3D application when it brought it in, then it's going to collide on a per poly basis.
Yeah, it will actually default to per poly if you didn't actually have a collision model.
Even though down there it's saying true, use the actual collision model.
Right, if no collision model is found, it'll go per poly.
Okay, I think that may have been what messed you up. But by default, yeah, it is looking to collide with a collision model. All right, then we've got projectiles. Okay, and projectiles are per poly. Based off what Logan said just a little bit earlier, of course, we're going to want to actually see the projectiles explode or detonate on the actual surface itself. And finally, karma. And karma is going to be looking to collide with karma primitives. So in other words, it's going to be set to true. But in this case, if there is no collision model found, or we could say karma primitive found, then there's going to be no collision. So in other words, if you died on top of, let's say, that platform in the background there, and there was no karma primitive, then you would actually fall through it. It wouldn't automatically default itself to doing per poly.
Right.
Okay, so that's just kind of a quick overview. This is a little bit different than how we've been doing some of the other lessons because there's just so much stuff. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start applying everything that we've been talking about. So, Logan, if you want to, let's go ahead and show just a basic blocking volume now.
Okay, so if we wanted to take this and create a blocking volume around it, well, it looks kind of like a cylinder.
Actually, you know what? Logan's gonna choke me here, but I got a better idea. We just brought this guy in, right?
Right.
So he's fresh. This is how, if you just created a static mesh in another application and you did not create a collision model, and then you just imported it in right here, this is what you've got. So one of the things we may want to do is just go ahead and show them some of the defaults, how it comes in, just the defaults that I just talked about a second ago, before we start breaking it up with some of these different techniques. Sound good?
Okay.
All right, so what we're going to do, and we're going to start doing this a little bit on and off, is at this point we're going to jump over to in-game play, so we're going to have to splice these together. So this will take about 2 seconds. All right, so here we are now inside the little level that we've got, and you can see the static mesh in front of us. And as we was talking about just a minute ago in regards to importing a static mesh, by default, the settings that you've got. Now, as I said, we did not have a collision model for this object. So the player collides with collision models by default, except if there is no collision model actually present, then it's going to use per poly. So, Logan, that means that right now you should be able to jump up on that thing without any trouble whatsoever.
Well, first, if I run into it, I walk into it.
Well,
if
there
I
you
jump,
go.
Then, yeah.
Okay, very good point. I didn't even point that out. Of course, if you run into it, it's going to stop you, of course. And then if you jump on top of it, you can walk on it. So you can now walk on it without any problem, so that's good. Now, projectiles, by default, they collide on a per poly basis. Let's find out if that's true.
Looks like it.
Looks good to me. Very nice. All right, then finally, karma. Same thing as the player as far as collisions are concerned. It's going to collide with a karma primitive, but since there was no collision model, when we imported this object into Unreal Ed, we did not get a karma primitive generated. And if there is no karma primitive, then there's going to be, and we're told to use it, then there's going to be no collision at all. So Logan, go ahead and suicide, and let's see if you'll actually fall through the static mesh. I would say you just fell through the static mesh. Okay, yep. Excellent. So this right here is the default settings that you've got when you bring a static mesh in, and you don't change any of the parameters available in the static mesh browser, and you also do not have a collision model. So with that, Logan, let's go ahead and jump back over into the game and show them about blocking volumes. Okay, so now that we've seen what a static mesh looks like, that's been freshly imported from another 3D application with no collision model whatsoever, now let's go ahead and start exploring some of the various ways that we can have actors and projectiles, when I say actors, I'm referring to players, of course, properly react to a collision with a static mesh. Let's go ahead and first, Logan, start out with the simple approach as we talked about earlier, and that's by using a simple blocking volume. Let's go ahead and show them how we can set up a blocking volume.
Okay, well, first I need the builder brush to use to add the blocking volume, so I'll come down and grab a cylinder, and let me move that over where I've got my mesh. And you can see it's too large. We could go in there and just play with numbers until it looked right, or we could actually go and measure the radius that we're going to need. So what I'll do is I'll hold Shift, and then I'll middle drag from about the center, drag a straight line out to the edge, and you can see that that's 384 units. So all I need to do now is bring up the cylinder's properties and set its outer radius to 384. And there we go, perfect fit.
That's very nice.
For the height, I'll just go ahead and set that to 16. Close that out, and that's the shape we want. Now all we have to do is come down to volumes and add a blocking volume. With that in place, I can move the builder brush out of the way, and there we go. There's our blocking volume.
So basically what you've just created is an invisible brush. I mean, like you've added a wall, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
So it's just a simple force field. Now, so if our player was to run up to this and run into it, it would actually stop him, correct?
Correct.
And if we jumped on top of it, we could also walk around on top, right?
Yep.
Well, what about those giant holes on each of the corners there?
Well, if you notice, we made this entire thing one big solid blocking volume, so it's going to act as one big flat octagonal surface. You would run right across those open places.
Okay, and what happens if you were to aim down at the object and fire?
Well, blocking volumes by default don't block projectiles, so if you aimed at the open spot, you would shoot right through it, or if you aimed at the mesh itself, you would actually hit it because the mesh still has the necessary properties to catch projectiles. In a sense.
Very nice. Okay, because basically the projectile is going to go right through the blocking volume and then strike the static mesh itself. And as you were just saying, the parameters are still set for it to react basically on a per polygon basis.
For projectiles, yes, exactly.
Okay, very good. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is let's go ahead and kill out that brush there, and let's take a look at how we can create a very simple collision model. Yeah.
All right, so first I want to go ahead and delete the blocking volume back out, and then move the builder brush in place. So what we're going to do now is actually create the collision model, what's actually going to be stored with the static mesh itself, not as a separate piece. So what I'll do is I'll be using this builder brush to actually create the collision model. Now, in order to do this, I'm going to make sure that it's lined up exactly, because it's going to matter where this is in relation to the static mesh itself. So with it lined up how I want,
actually, Logan, if I can get you right before you actually add it, open up your static mesh browser just so that you can show them. Make sure that, there you go. Show collisions turned on. Good. And you can see that inside the viewport area, there is no pink wireframe outline surrounding that geometry right there. So in other words, there is no collision model at the moment. I just want that up so that they can see it actually get added in there.
All right. So now I've got my builder brush in place where I want it. I can simply right-click on the static mesh I want to add a collision model to, and say Save Brush as Collision. When I do that, and then refresh the static mesh browser, there we go.
Very nice. Now you got the pink wireframe outline around it. Now again, this is acting kind of like what we saw a second ago, where we had a force field, if you will, over the entire thing. So in other words, you will actually walk over those holes, correct?
Right. It's still just one flat octagonal surface.
But now we had something else occur when we just created this collision model. We just got a karma primitive as well, didn't we?
Right. When we brought that in, it automatically, when you save a brush as collision, it'll also automatically take that and create the collision primitives, karma primitives, out of that as well.
Okay, very nice. So now if you were to actually die on top of that platform, you would not fall through it, correct?
Right. Now we would actually have a collision primitive for the karma to hit.
Okay, very nice. So that's being done with a very simple brush. What happens if we have a more complex piece of geometry for our static mesh? Actually, this one works well right here, where we've got these holes cut out, and let's say perhaps we had something maybe that was sprouting up in different directions. How would we go about using something or setting up a collision model with brushes when we needed multiple brushes to be involved?
Right, you notice that we have to use the builder brush, and of course you only have one builder brush. So if we needed to make a more complex shape, and still using just brushes, we'd have to use multiple brushes to define the shape in the first place. But of course, we can always go back and intersect stuff with our builder brush, and then we have a more complex looking builder brush.
Very nice. Let's see if we could go ahead and create, let's just say the simple walkway area, the plus that you see there.
Okay, so just create some cubes across here real quick. You saw the radius was 384, so twice that should be about 768, and there we've got the length. Now the width, that of course is the that metal border you can see, and we want to collide with that. So let me measure across here real quick. Again, holding shift, middle drag across, and that's about 288 units, so grab that. And again, the height's 16, same as before when it was a cylinder. And there we've got our first piece, so I can go ahead and close that out. And I'm going to actually add this because, of course, when we intersect, we need to have the geometry there to intersect. So let me add this first one. Simply rotate, not the mesh, the builder brush. Rotate that around 90 degrees, so we've got the other walkway. Add in another brush. Now I need to make the builder brush large enough so that it completely encompasses both these blue addition brushes. So I'll simply up its height a little bit, 32, and set both its width and breadth to 800, just to make sure that both those addition cubes are completely inside the builder brush now, and which they are. So I can come down to intersect and intersect those. Now I have one builder brush that's in the cross shape we wanted. So again, if we come down and I can open up the static mesh browser, you can see we have the simple collision model as well as the simple collision primitive, karma primitive around it. Now, I can right-click on the mesh itself, save brush as collision, because of course we want that more complicated builder brush now. Save it, and we already have a collision model, and it's going to ask us if we want to replace that. We're going to go ahead and say yes, and if we refresh the view, there we go. You can see the pink lines for the collision model and more karma primitives.
Yeah, actually, if we turn our karma primitives off right now, it'll be very easy to see the, there you go, very easy to see the outline. And the karma primitives as well, they don't look like that. In fact, Logan, if you could turn karma primitives on real quick and then turn, there you go. If it may be a little bit tough to see, there's multiple colors going on, but it's actually divided up into, what do we got, 3 different ones?
Right.
And you want to talk about that real quick?
Well, see, what it was is the collision of the karma primitives have to be convex. They can't have any part that caves in, or well, it's concave. And you see, as we're coming across here, and then the shape comes in, goes back out to form that cross shape. That wouldn't really work as a karma primitive. So what it had to do is break that up into different karma primitives that basically equated to the same general shape.
So when you're working inside another 3D application and you're creating a collision model, that thing, all because it's going to be one piece of geometry that's going to get brought over into Unreal Ed, it's going to generally get divided up into several karma primitives.
Right. If you had a somewhat more like a complex collision model, it would have to divide it up into valid karma primitives.
Okay, very nice. So with that, I guess go ahead and delete out those additive brushes.
Right. So we don't need those anymore, obviously, because the collision's part of the mesh itself. So I'm just going to delete out the blue addition brushes. Let me move my builder out of the way real quick. And delete those out. Do a quick build all. And we should be ready to go.
Okay, so what we're going to do real quick is jump over into the game. Logan, I just want to show them how some of these things that we've been adding have effect on the actual character and projectiles.
Okay.
And karma as well. So with that, we're about to jump over into the game. Here we are inside the game looking at our static mesh that now has a collision model that basically represents a cross shape. Logan, show us what we've got.
Okay, of course, we didn't have the collision model extend out here, so if I was to run through this piece, of course I run straight through it. Then if I run all the way up to where we do have the collision model, I hit it, can jump on it, and now I'm walking on top of it.
We can walk around like normal. Hey, that's fantastic. Now, how does it work as far as projectiles are concerned?
Well, it's still colliding per poly on the static mesh itself, so even this outside piece still collides because projectiles are looking at per poly, not the collision mesh. It's a collision model.
Exactly, by default that is.
Right.
And we've never changed that setting, at least not yet. Okay, so that brings us to one last thing. How does the new Karma primitive work?
Okay, let's try it out. Let's do a quick suicide over the brush, and ow, ow, ow. But yeah, we are, ow.
Looks kind of painful, ow. Guy's going to twitch for a minute. Reason we're getting so much extra twitching going on is the processor's under quite a load right now with all of the video recording, and it makes the Karma do some, well, let's just say interesting things from time to time.
Right, but we are, in fact, on the mesh itself now, not falling through it.
Exactly, which we were doing earlier. So that pretty much wraps up what we wanted to show in this section, so we're now going to cut back over into Unreal Ed again. Thanks. We've seen how we can create a collision model from simple brushes. Let's go ahead and take it a little bit further and see how we can create collision models from another 3D application. Now, as we said earlier, we've got to make sure that that 3D application has the capabilities of exporting out to an ASC file format. So, and there's a special reason you'll see it deals with naming, and we'll take a look at that in just a second. Logan, go ahead and talk about the collision model that you're going to create from 3ds Max.
Well, see, what we're going to do now is actually go back to Max where we had this mesh actually in Max before we exported it. And at that point, we're going to go and create another object that we can use as the collision, and then bring both of those objects, one, of course, as the mesh itself, and the other one immediately be converted into the collision model.
Okay, and you're not going to take the time to model out this entire thing. I mean, that would obviously take a while, and this VTM is getting very long as is. So what we'll do is just do something simple. Basically, he's just going to cover one of the walkways and perhaps extend it a little bit past the end of the walkway so that we can demonstrate the fact that it is indeed colliding with the character.
Right.
So go ahead and Alt-Tab on over to 3ds Max, and there we are.
Okay, here we have the mesh before we brought it into Unreal Ed. So all I'm going to do is say just cover this walkway and then extend out a little. And we'll use this one extension as our collision model. So I'll go ahead and grab a box and drag out a box over the rough area and then extend it past some. Just so once we play it in game, we can see it can actually walk out to this area. And then I'll just drag it up to it's about around 16 or as close as we can get. Again, they're not going to actually see this, just collide with it, so it doesn't have to be exact.
Yeah, I mean, we could go in height and actually type out 16 if we wanted to right now.
Right.
Or we could have been snapping, or it doesn't matter, but that's good enough.
Okay, so I'll just right-click to finish the tool. And now we've got the new box in place where we want the collision model. But there's a special naming convention for objects that will be used as a collision model or models. You have to go and change its name and give it a prefix of MCDCX underscore and then whatever you want. And that prefix will tell, once Unreal Ed goes to import this, if it sees any objects with MCDCX underscore, it'll turn those into collision models instead of just the mesh itself.
All right, sounds good. So now we're ready to go ahead and export?
Right. So I'll go ahead and, let's see, just marquee over both of them because we need to export both objects, of course. Come to File and Export Selected. Let me drop this in that extra folder we created underneath the UT 2003 folder. And I'll just, let's see, we want to make sure we do an ASCII scene export. And I'll call it platform, that's C3.
Sounds good.
So save that out. And of course, what we've been using is fine, so I'll hit OK. And let me tab back over to Unreal Ed. Now, open the static mesh browser. And let's see. I can simply say File, Import, and let me go and grab that. So here's the ASC we just exported from Max. Go ahead and open that up. Tell it we want to put it in the My Level package, and go ahead and let it call it Platform C3. Hit OK. Karma collision found, and do we want to go ahead and create that? That's where it's going and taking that collision model, and it's asking us if we want to go ahead and create the necessary Karma primitives out of that. So we're going to hit yes. Go ahead and let it create those. And there it created the convex hull. Now, we have that platform C3. We can click on it. There it is. If we go up to View and hit Show Collision, there's that box.
Very nice.
Now, we could have just used Turn to Poly and triangulated it ourselves. In this case, it was able to auto-triangulate it. But if you run into problems importing, you might try triangulating it yourself in Max first.
And another point about working over inside of 3ds Max or any other 3D application, when you're creating a collision object like this, don't have it extremely dense, there's no reason to go about doing that.
Right, you always want the collision model to be as simple as possible just to block in the area that you want to collide with. Extra detail will just slow it down and possibly even stick to the player. You'll get caught on it and stuff.
Okay, Logan, so now can you go ahead and add that into the level, and let's play this and make sure that our character can actually walk out on that extra extended space now?
Okay, let me just go out into this extra space over here and add this static mesh. So I'll add the other version. Let me close out the browser. Okay, in top view, let me go and grab this new mesh, drag it out so it's just separate. And let me see, from the front view, maybe move it up a little, like such. And simply build all.
If you were to show collisions now inside your viewport right there.
If I was to go to right-click in the gray bar here, go to View, and say Show Collisions.
So we can see which way we can expect. You might want to slide it over a little bit.
Right, I can slide it over, all the way over to this wall if I want.
There you go.
So now if we were to walk out on this point, even though we wouldn't see the mesh, we'd still be able to stand above the ground here.
And if we were walking actually on the ground right there in that direction toward the wall, there'd be an invisible barrier that would basically stop us. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and jump into Unreal Tournament 2003 and check this out. Now we're inside the game, and Logan, well, right now you're looking at the second static mesh that we just added in, correct?
Right.
The other one's behind us. So go ahead and show them how the collision's going to affect us now.
Okay, if you remember, we added the collision so it's running along that part of the path. So, of course, if I run through any of this part, I run straight through it. I can run up to and hit that part where we added the collision model. I can jump up on it. Now I'm standing on it. But remember, we had the collision model extend outside the static mesh itself. And, of course, if I run over there, I'm still hitting that collision model.
Floating in the air.
Or I can run into it and stop. So, of course, it's going to reflect the collision model wherever it is.
Now, we also have the ability to show collision models inside of Unreal Tournament while you're actually playing the game. So, Logan, you want to show them that?
Okay, if you bring down the console and type Show Collision, then you can actually see where the collision models are in-game. So you can see that's where that collision model extends to.
And the other one behind you?
And same
see
thing.
That it's the
of course,
cross-shaped.
Yeah, when we created that cross-shaped brush.
Very cool. Very good to know. All right, so that pretty much demonstrates that point there. So now we're going to head back over into Unreal Ed. All right, so now that we've seen how that collision model worked that we created in 3ds Max and brought into Unreal Ed here, and it's actually packaged with the static mesh. Isn't that right, Logan?
That's right.
All right, so now what we want to do is go ahead and talk a little bit about KDOP. And it's going to be best to demonstrate this with another static mesh as opposed to the platform that we've got right there. And go ahead and tell them why.
Okay. Well, see, what KDOP's going to do is try to fit a bounding box or a beveled bounding box around your mesh. And the thing is, there's no odd angles or anything on this mesh. It's all pretty much just 90-degree angles. So it's going to keep a very simple shape no matter which method we use. What we're going to do is use this more complex mesh that we conveniently snagged from another package. And we're going to use it simply because you have all these nice funky angles that it's going to have to think about in order to create this this enhanced bounding box, if you want to call it that.
Okay.
So I'm going to open up the static mesh browser and, of course, grab that mesh. I've just got a very simple cube collision model on it right now. So if we want to take a look at some of the other KDOPs we have, just go up to Collision Tools, and then there's all the KDOPs we can assign to it. Fit 6 stop, of course, that's just a box. As a matter of fact, that's what I've got on it now, so you'll see no change. It's just it's a box. Fits as best as it can to the mesh. Right after that, we've got Fit 10 dop, and we can fit that around X, Y, or Z. What that's going to do is it's going to try to fit to these angles as best it can, but only from one direction. Like if we were to fit just in this axis, it's going to go around the mesh, but then this face will still be flat. So if I was to...
It's basically kind of like a deformed cylinder along a particular axis.
Right. And go ahead and replace it and this axis. But you can see where this face is just flat, but then along the y-axis, it went ahead and tried to bound around and try to add angles in as necessary to better fit the object. And of course, you can assign that around X, Y, or Z. After that, we've got an 18 dop. This is where it will bevel all edges, not just the edges around a certain axis. So an 18 dop, so you have to go ahead and replace. And there you can see it's
starting to get a lot closer to matching the actual shape.
Right. It's now got a slanted face to cover this area, and then beveling anywhere else that might need more detail.
But still very simple for a collision object.
Right. So we can go one level farther and say do a 26 stop, and at that point, now it's going to start beveling even more, even bevel at.
It's going to bevel the edges and the corners now.
Right, right. So you can see it's actually beveling. It's actually going out where this pipe is, but then it has enough detail to bevel back in before it gets to the main part of the mesh.
Very nice. So this is just another approach, just another way about creating a type of collision model.
Right, and of course it's also creating a karma primitive along with it every time. So if you create the collision from KDOP, you'll have your collision primitive matching the exact shape.
Excellent.
Right there.
All right, well, speaking of karma primitives, this allows us to go ahead. There's no real reason to do a play test on this. They're going to get the idea. Basically, we'll run into this object right here and not be able to walk through it.
Exactly.
So now let's go ahead and spend just a minute and talk about karma primitives. And let's turn our focus back over to that platform. In fact, we can just do the platform that had the cross shape on it, or the plus shape. That one will work there. And Logan, let's show them what, let's say, like a sphere karma primitive, how that would react in gameplay to separate the karma primitive from the collision model itself. In other words, the difference between the two.
Right. So what I can do now is, with the platform, I can go and say, collision tools, fit karma primitive. Now, either of these, if I fit a sphere or a cylinder around a certain axis, this will leave the collision model alone, basically the model that your player would run into, but create just a primitive for karma interaction. So if I was to fit a sphere around it and go ahead and replace the current karma primitive, now you see we still have the pink outline of where our collision model is, but then we have the karma primitive, that's the sphere. So it's actually two separate things, and this will really show how they can be treated separately.
So in other words, we should be able to, we've already mentioned this in this lesson, but I should be able to jump up and run on that platform without any problem. I should be able to shoot the platform without any problem. But if I was, let's say, for some reason above the platform and I was killed, then I would fall and hit that green bounding object that you see there and basically slide off of it.
Right.
All right, well, let's do this. Let's go ahead and jump over into game real quick, and let's demonstrate that.
Right, of course, I've been messing around with this platform here so we don't have to make any in-level changes. We've already replaced the karma primitive.
Okay, sounds good. So let's jump over in game. Hey, Logan, so we're back in game here, and you're looking at the first static mesh, the one with the plus-shaped collision model, and it has the giant sphere karma primitive. So go ahead and jump up on that thing, and let's make sure you can walk around on it.
All right, still walk around. And, of course, we just jumped through where that karma primitive is, so, of course, the player itself doesn't collide with the karma primitive.
All right, and, of course, you can still shoot at the platform if you want to. Very nice. All right, now turn on your mystical powers and float up toward the top.
And off we go.
All right, now turn on your mystical powers and kill yourself. Ka-thunk.
But check that out.
That was quite entertaining. First of all, as we pointed out earlier, the karma is calculating quite interesting right now because we are really putting a strong load on our processors. But as you saw, he did not fall straight down and run into the platform. He actually came down and got bumped off and around by this magical force field that was up in the air. And then again, that was because of the karma primitive. Otherwise, he would have just gone straight down and landed on the platform.
Right.
Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and jump back over into Unreal Ed.
Okay.
Hey, Logan, well, that was quite an interesting demonstration you just gave us there. So now that we're back here into Unreal Ed, I think we've done just about everything that we need to as far as demonstrating how to go about generating collision models. So now let's just kind of move on and start talking about some of the parameters that we have available for static meshes. Now, earlier we talked about the ability of using per poly collision, and I mentioned briefly that when using per poly collision that we could then step things down a level lower if we wanted to and use materials to determine if a collision was or was not to occur. So at this point we could say that it would be per material almost in a unique way, I guess. So Logan, let's go ahead and show them how they can use materials to determine if there will be a collision or not.
Okay, inside the static mesh browser.
The very first thing we'll need to do would be,
well, since we're still using a collision model, we're not using per poly right now because, of course, we have said use simple box collision and use simple karma collision. So those are going to be looking for a collision model to use. And, of course, if we're going to specify per material, we have to be using per poly. So we'd have to go in and set these to false. So we go back to using per poly even though we do have a collision model.
Okay.
So after that, we can expand materials. And then under each material, we've got enable collision. And we can set that to true or false, whether or not players will collide with that material. And that way we can go in there and specify, like, this is the material that runs around this outside edge. If we were to set this to false, then players would be able to run right through anything that had this material on it, but then we'd still run into the parts of the mesh that had the great material on it, because, of course, its enable collision is still set to true.
Very simple. So very easy to set up, but yet can be very powerful if you're using multiple materials in controlling where things will and will not collide. All right, Logan, so again, these parameters that you've been talking about right here affect all instances of that static mesh throughout the level, right?
Right, we're still working in the static mesh browser, and if we were to save it, of course we're saving this static mesh before it's even used. So every one of this mesh gets all of these parameters here.
Okay. Now, every static mesh that's in your map does have some individuality, though. We do have the ability to go into its collision parameters, and there are various parameters in there that we just may be interested in right now, right, Logan?
Right. Of course, you can still grab individual static meshes and bring up their properties, or you could have right-clicked on it. And under here, we have collision, and this will allow us to specify collision properties on a per static mesh basis. So looking through these collision properties, some of the ones of interest would be, let's start with B-collide actors. What this will give us is like a global on-off switch for if anything should collide with this mesh at all, projectiles, players, or anything. So if you had like one copy of your mesh that you threw somewhere and it was just a decoration, you didn't want anything to collide with it, you can just turn collide actors off, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
So let's go back up a little, and you've got B block karma. So if you had one mesh somewhere and you didn't want any ragdolls or vehicles to be able to hit it, you could turn karma collision off for that static mesh.
Simple enough.
Below that, we've got B block non-zero extent traces. What this is going to do is this is the on-off switch for whether or not this players will collide with the static mesh.
Okay, players and translocators?
Right, of course, because the translocator follows the same rules as the player collision-wise. Down a little further, we have B block zero extent traces. This is going to be projectiles, rockets, etc.
So this kind of, if you think about it, ties all the way back to the very beginning, where at the beginning I said everything breaks down into three categories of collision. You have players, you have projectiles, and you have karma. And right here, Logan just showed you that we've got B-collide actors, and that acts as a master on-off or global on-off switch. And then for the particular static mesh, of course, that we're looking at parameters for. And then we've got, again, the division of players, projectiles, and karma with B-block non-zero extent traces for players, B-block zero extent trace for projectiles, and B-block karma for karma objects. So very simple. And also there's a B-path colliding that you might want to talk about real quick.
Okay, that's going to be if you've once you have path nodes and various paths through your level for the bots or AI to use. What path colliding will do is like it'll decide whether bots will be able to see through the mesh to other path nodes, basically whether or not they'll try to walk through the mesh.
Very good. All right, so that's good. I mean, we've now talked about the different way collisions can occur, the different ways that we can set it up, basically different collision models. We've gone over quite a bit of stuff. We've also gone over quite a few parameters as well. So now let's go ahead and shift gears if we can, Logan, and let's start talking a little bit about vehicle collision with a static mesh, because now it's a karma object that's colliding with a static mesh. It also has its karma primitives, and this can become a little bit complicated.
Right. But before we do that, just one other thing I wanted to point out, actually maybe two things. The surface type. With surface type, we can define what the sound will be when we walk across the mesh. We can drop this down, and we've got quite a few things there. Like if you had made a mesh of a rock, or if it was made of metal, you can go in and specify what footsteps sound you want as your player's walking across the mesh.
Very nice.
Also, this BU cylinder collision. If you've ever worked with other actors' properties, you might be familiar with this. This is just specifying a collision cylinder. This will use that cylinder, and it'll like override any kind of per poly, or if you had a collision model. If again, this is what you used to use if you just had a simple actor. You can go, say, use this collision cylinder, specify a height and radius for it, and then you have just a very simplistic collision. If you had just a decoration that you might collide with, you could use something like this. It's just one more method that you could use.
Okay, it's just something generally, though, that you will not, though.
Right, once you're building like high detail stuff that you have different parts that you can and cannot collide with, you'll want to use more advanced methods like make a collision model.
All right, so with that out of the way, you ready to move on to vehicles?
Okay, sounds good. Let's do that. So now I'm going to shift my view over to another little room I've built off to the side here. I'm going to move my views, and over here I've got 2 platforms.
Dun, dun, dun.
Now, well, the goal here is we're going to try to get a vehicle to drive over these platforms. Now,
Each platform is actually created up of 3 different static meshes.
right, we've got, I use these 2 slanted ramps on either side and then 1 straight piece to connect them.
Okay.
Now, this it's a little setting up collisions for a vehicle is just a little bit tricky because a vehicle being a much more complex karma object. If you were to just take a mesh like this, you can see we have show collision turned on, so you can see the collision model that this mesh is using. And if you try to use a collision model with something like a vehicle, it'll actually get stuck on the collision model in a way. It's kind of odd how it works. So what we're going to have to do is compensate for that. And there's 2 main ways we could do that. One, we could set the collision type for this mesh to per poly. Now, that would be fairly inefficient, especially on these edges here where you have more detail. You start hitting that many small triangles with a vehicle, and it's going to really slow down the karma calculation. So the other way we could get around doing this is by actually building some invisible geometry around this and then turning the actual karma collision for the mesh itself off and letting the vehicle collide with some invisible geometry that we build around it.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do here is grab my views and shift them over so I can see what I'm working on here. There's a front view of the mesh I've got. What I'm going to do is just build a simple cube underneath here and then vertex edit it so it fills in this area. So we'll have something to drive over. So I'll go grab a cube.
Of course, this will prevent the ability to run or crouch and go up underneath the ramps, but in this case right here, it's just to show you quickly how we could go about doing this. Of course, you could spend more time creating brushes that would properly encompass those static meshes right there.
Right. I'm going to grab this cube, maybe widen it out just a little bit, just so that in case you were to drive over these little edges, you'd still have something to drive into. And then I'm going to move the mesh down a little and center it up there. I could worry about the height, but since I'm going to have to vertex edit the position of the vertices on the bottom, I'm just going to leave it like that. Grab some vertex editing, hold Control Alt, drag across these bottom vertices so I have these 2 vertices selected, and I can simply drag them into place now and zoom in a little and snap them to right about there. Grab the other 2, drag them into place, say right about there. I might drag these out. That looks about right. I'm going to go check this out in my perspective view. Now, of course, you could go spend a little bit more time, get it a little bit more exact, but you'll be able to tell that that's there when we drive into it. So with the builder brush in place, I'm going to turn vertex editing off, and now I'm going to hit Add Special. And under the Add Special dialog, I'm going to check Semi-Solid. This is to keep the brush from interfering with any other BSP surrounding it. And I'm also going to check Invisible, because of course we want to look like we're driving over just a static mesh itself. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and that will add that brush. I can close the dialog out now. So now I've got that actual brush there, but after we rebuild, you won't be able to see this in-game because we had set the special brush properties to invisible. Now I can simply move the builder brush out of the way, and I could add another one, or I could just grab the existing one, Control W to duplicate it, and I'll move it into place on the other side. Zoom in a little, and right about there. Okay? So of course that's a brush I moved over, so I'd have to rebuild to actually see the change I made. And yes, I didn't throw any textures on those brushes. But there we've actually got those in place now. So that's just regular geometry. Of course, even though it's invisible, you can still see it in the editor. It will be invisible once you're in the game. Now, one last thing I need to do is you can see the static mesh itself is still kind of above that the brush we added there. So we'd still run into the problem of the collision issues because the karma object, in our case the vehicle we're going to have in just a second, is still colliding with the static mesh. What I need to do is grab each static mesh, and let me see here, hold Control, grab, and even though you can't see the effect, I'll grab these as well. And I should have all 6 of them selected. Bring up their properties. Under their collision, like you saw just a second ago, we have that B block karma. I'm going to turn that to false. So now karma doesn't worry about the static meshes themselves at all. That way we'll be able to just, karma will just be looking at those brushes we added for collision.
So at this point, now the vehicle's just going to see that like driving over just a regular set of brushes.
Exactly.
Regular ground.
Right, right. Okay, so with that, that's about all we need to do for the setup so that we can easily drive a vehicle over these.
Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and jump back into gameplay and take a look at this. Okay, so we're in game, and before we get started, the first thing I'd like to do is point out something that we had to go and fix. If you remember just a few minutes ago inside the editor, when we added in those two invisible brushes, there was no material assigned, and we got a warning about it. Now, when we actually came in and played the level, we did not have a problem with that in regards to being able to actually run over those invisible meshes, and it appeared that we were actually running over these ramps. And if we were to die on it, in other words, the ragdoll was to collide, we had no problems with that. But the moment we jumped in the vehicle and the vehicle touched those two brushes, then Unreal Tournament would crash every time. So we had to go back over into Unreal Ed, explicitly assign materials to it, and then come back in, and then everything worked fine. So with that out of the way, Logan, if you want to go ahead and take just a second and talk about this summoned vehicle setup you've got.
Okay. Well, if I run up to that trigger there, you see it spawns the vehicle. Now, if you want to figure out how to set up a similar system in your own map, just check out the vehicle demo that comes with the game. So now we've got a vehicle, we've got some ramps, let's check it out. So, driving forward and up and over the ramps.
Very nice. Now, it looks like that's no big deal, but if they were using collision models, it would be a big deal. Is that correct?
Right. If you're using collision models, the vehicle would basically stick to those collision models.
We would get a flypaper type effect. It would just stick and the wheels would spin.
Right.
Which would not necessarily be a good thing. And we could use per poly, as Logan said a little bit earlier, and that would have worked. But with that, it would have come with the cost of calculation time.
Right, or odd effects if you hit the really detailed parts of the mesh.
Exactly. So in this case, we're using two very simple brushes, and it's doing a really good job. All right, so Logan, let's go ahead and show them just a couple more things before we wrap up this entire lesson. If you want to go ahead and talk about, well, you know what you want to talk about next.
Right. Well, one thing that'd be nice to see is like what's the exact triangles that are being fed to Karma for these for the collision. To see that, we can bring up K-draw triangles and hit enter, and then we can see exactly what triangles are being fed to Karma for collision. So as I drive back over the mesh itself, you can see it starts highlighting the different triangles that it has to use for calculation.
Okay, very nice.
And one final thing you might want to check out would be Stat Game. What Stat Game will do is give you some useful collision info. If you look at the top left corner of the screen, we have collision and then the karma section. So we can see exactly how much time each type of collision is taking. So you can make sure that under all cases, like if you're walking around or if you're driving over or ragdoll on a mesh, see what your collision times are, and if any are too high, take the necessary action or change your collision method or whatever's necessary to bring the number back down.
Absolutely. So quite a bit going on here. This was a very big lesson if you want to think about it. I mean, we could almost do an entire VTM on just collisions. I mean, there's so much going on, and we've covered a lot of material. Some of you guys out there may want to watch this a couple of times. Collisions for static meshes are extremely important. It's very good to make sure that you've got everything optimized so that gameplay continues nice, smooth, and fast. So with that, that's going to wrap up this lesson right here. I'd like to thank you guys for bearing with us through it all. So thanks a lot.